Nobody in Silver Creek, Montana territory stopped to ask why the boy had stolen the bread. All they saw was a skinny teenager darting through the muddy main street with a fresh loaf tucked beneath his arm. Angry voices erupted from every direction. "Stop him. He's stealing again. Somebody catch that little rat." The afternoon market exploded into chaos as townsfolk abandoned their wagons and storefronts to join the chase. Chickens scattered across the road. Horses snorted nervously. Dust mixed with fresh rainwater beneath pounding boots. The boy never looked back. His clothes were worn almost to threads, patched together so many times that none of the original fabric remained. Mud splashed against his trousers as he slipped between wagons, ducked under a hitching rail, and disappeared into the narrow alley beside the blacksmith's shop. Mrs. Eleanor Briggs, owner of the bakery, stood outside clutching her apron. "My bread," she shouted, though there was less anger in her voice than confusion. "That boy's lost his mind." Most people only knew him as Noah Pierce. The orphan. The troublemaker. The boy who never stayed in one place long enough for anyone to trust him. Few knew where he slept. Fewer cared. The crowd poured after him, convinced they were chasing another common thief. Only one man stayed where he was. Elias Boone rested both hands atop the polished handle of his walking stick and watched the scene unfold from beneath the porch of the general store. At 63, the retired United States Marshal had learned something most men never did. People running from guilt looked over their shoulders. People running from fear never did. Noah never once glanced behind him. That alone told Elias something wasn't right. He adjusted the brim of his weathered hat and quietly stepped off the porch. "I'm going for a walk," he muttered to no one in particular. The chase thundered toward the edge of town. Within minutes, the shouting began to fade. One by one, the townsfolk slowed. Most weren't interested in running more than a few hundred yards for a loaf of bread. Eventually they gave up, grumbling to themselves before drifting back toward Silver Creek. Elias continued walking. Not quickly. Not slowly. Simply following the faint trail left by muddy footprints leading toward the pine forest beyond town. The old marshal had spent half his life tracking fugitives. A frightened 14-year-old left a trail even easier to follow. Broken branches. Fresh footprints. Drops of rainwater shaken loose from low-hanging limbs. The forest grew quiet around him. Only the distant call of a hawk interrupted the silence. Nearly half an hour later, Elias spotted movement ahead. Noah wasn't hiding. He had dropped to his knees outside an abandoned mining shack that leaned against the hillside like it had grown tired of standing. The boy looked over both shoulders before carefully pushing open the crooked wooden door. Elias remained behind a cluster of pine trees. Then he heard it. Not voices. A cough. Weak. Painful. Human. Noah hurried inside. Moments later he reappeared carrying a dented bucket toward a nearby creek. He filled it with water, rushed back inside, then emerged again holding the stolen loaf. He tore it carefully into small pieces before disappearing once more. Elias frowned. That wasn't how thieves behaved. Curiosity finally outweighed caution. He approached the cabin slowly and stopped outside the doorway. Inside, sunlight slipped through broken roof boards, revealing dust drifting through the air. The room smelled of damp wood and dried blood. Noah spun around instantly. His face turned pale. I didn't steal it for me," he blurted before Elias had spoken a single word. The old marshal raised one calm hand. "I'm listening." The boy hesitated before stepping aside. Only then did Elias see the man lying on the floor. He appeared to be nearly 70. His gray beard was stained with dried blood. One shoulder had been wrapped in strips torn from an old blanket, now soaked crimson once again. His breathing came in shallow, uneven bursts. Someone had been shot. Recently. Elias crouched beside him without saying a word. The wound had already begun to turn angry around the edges. Without proper treatment, infection would finish what the bullet had started. "Who is he?" Elias asked quietly. Noah shook his head. "I don't know." "You don't know?" "I found him yesterday near the river." "You've been taking care of him ever since?" The boy nodded. "He couldn't even stand." "And the bread?" Noah lowered his eyes. "He hadn't eaten in 2 days." Silence settled inside the shack. Outside, wind whispered through the pines. Elias studied the boy for several long seconds. He remembered chasing real thieves. They lied before questions were asked. They protected themselves first. This boy had stolen only enough food to keep a dying stranger alive. That wasn't theft born from greed. It was desperation. Elias removed his canteen and handed it to Noah. "Give him small sips." The boy accepted it carefully. You're not taking me back? Not today. Relief washed across Noah's face so suddenly that it almost looked painful. As Elias leaned closer to inspect the wounded man's coat, something caught his eye. Beneath the torn leather vest, hidden just inside the lining, rested a weathered leather pouch tied securely with faded rawhide. Dark stains covered its surface. It hadn't been placed there by accident. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. Elias gently loosened the strap just enough to glimpse what lay inside. Folded papers. Old maps. Several official-looking documents bearing faded government seals. Before he could examine them further, the wounded man's trembling hand suddenly clamped around his wrist. Clouded gray eyes opened only halfway. With what little strength he had left, the stranger whispered 5 words that made the old marshal's heartbeat stop. "Don't let Silas Crow find them." The wounded man's grip was surprisingly firm for someone standing so close to death. "Don't let Silas Crow find them." His hand fell away as quickly as it had risen, and his eyes drifted shut once more. The shack returned to silence except for the crackling of the small fire Noah had managed to keep alive. Elias stared at the weathered leather pouch. He had spent decades wearing a marshal's badge, and experience had taught him one simple truth. Men didn't chase dying strangers for ordinary papers. Whatever rested inside that pouch had already spilled blood. He untied the rawhide cord carefully. Inside lay several folded maps, brittle with age, a faded surveyor's notebook, and a stack of official land deeds bearing the seal of the Montana Territorial Office. One name appeared over and over. Silas Crow. Another name caught Elias' attention. Thomas Mercer, Chief Surveyor. The old man lying on the floor. Elias slowly unfolded the largest map across the wooden table. His weathered eyes narrowed. The boundaries drawn on the parchment didn't match the official maps hanging inside Silver Creek's courthouse. According to these records, the Rich Crow Ranch stood directly over land that had once belonged to 7 different mining families. Families who had vanished from town nearly 20 years earlier. Noah watched nervously. What does it mean? Elias didn't answer immediately. He compared 2 documents before speaking. It means somebody rewrote history. The old marshal folded everything back into the pouch. And somebody has been willing to kill to keep it that way. A sudden rumble echoed outside. Horse hooves. Both Elias and Noah froze. 3 riders appeared between the pine trees. They weren't traveling the main trail. They were searching. Their horses moved slowly, their eyes sweeping every inch of the forest floor. One rider leaned from his saddle and studied fresh footprints in the mud. "They came this way," he called. Elias quietly blew out the lantern. The cabin fell into darkness. Noah barely breathed. The riders stopped only 50 yards away. Their leader removed his hat, revealing a scar that stretched from one eyebrow to his jaw. "I know you're hiding out here," he shouted into the trees. "We're only after the old man. No need for anyone else to get hurt." Noah's hands began to shake. "They work for Crow," he whispered. "How do you know?" "I've seen them in town." Elias looked toward the broken window. The men hadn't found the shack yet, but they were getting closer. Very slowly, he picked up the surveyor's pouch and slipped it beneath his coat. "If they find those papers," he murmured, "this man's sacrifice means nothing." Outside, one rider dismounted. Branches snapped. Boots crunched across wet leaves. The search had become personal. Elias motioned Noah toward the back wall. "There another way out?" The boy nodded. "A crawl space." Without another word, Noah pulled aside a loose stack of firewood, revealing a narrow opening beneath the cabin floor. Just wide enough for one person at a time. Elias carefully lifted the unconscious surveyor onto his shoulders. Age protested immediately. His back ached. His knees complained. But years as a lawman had taught him that pain could wait. Failure couldn't. They crawled beneath the cabin moments before the front door burst open. Boots thundered across the wooden floor overhead. "Search everything." Furniture crashed. Glass shattered. One of the riders cursed. "They're gone." Another answered. "Not far." The 3 men remained inside for several tense minutes before finally riding away. Only after the hoofbeats disappeared did Elias allow himself to breathe again. The group emerged from beneath the cabin covered in mud. Noah glanced back nervously. "They'll come back." "They might." "What do we do now?" Elias looked toward the distant mountains rising beyond the trees. "We move." Night settled across Montana as they traveled deeper into the wilderness. They avoided roads, crossed shallow streams to hide their tracks, and rested only when the surveyor's condition forced them to stop. Near midnight they reached Elias' old hunting cabin hidden among towering pines. It wasn't much. One room, stone fireplace, a small stable. But it couldn't be seen from any trail. For now, it was safe. While Noah boiled water, Elias cleaned the stranger's wound. The old surveyor groaned but never fully woke. After wrapping fresh bandages around his shoulder, Elias stepped outside onto the porch. The stars stretched endlessly across the western sky. He thought about the documents. About 7 forgotten families. About a wealthy rancher whose fortune might have been built on stolen land. Footsteps approached quietly behind him. Noah carried 2 tin cups of coffee. You really believe those papers? Elias accepted the cup. I've seen forged records before. He looked toward the dark valley below. But I've also seen honest men disappear because they knew too much. The boy hesitated before speaking again. My father used to tell me never to trust Silas Crow. Elias slowly turned. You knew about him? Noah nodded. My father worked for the surveyor years ago. What happened to him? The boy stared into the firelight. He said there were men stealing land from honest families. His voice cracked. One night, he never came home. Silence settled between them. Everything suddenly made sense. The fear. The running. The stolen bread. The desperate effort to keep a dying stranger alive. Noah hadn't been protecting a random traveler. He had been protecting the last living witness to the truth that had destroyed his own family. Before Elias could respond, the distant barking of dogs shattered the quiet. Then came another sound. Horse hooves. Many of them. More than 3 this time. Elias stepped to the edge of the porch and looked down toward the valley. Lanterns flickered through the darkness like a line of hunting wolves. He counted them. 1, 3, 5, 8 riders. At their head rode a broad-shouldered man dressed in a long black duster. Even from this distance, Elias recognized the confidence in the rider's posture. Only a man who believed the entire territory belonged to him rode that way. Silas Crow had come himself. Elias quietly closed the cabin door and reached for the old Winchester hanging above the fireplace. He wasn't preparing for a gunfight. He was preparing for something far more dangerous. A battle over the truth. Outside, the lanterns continued climbing the mountain trail. And by sunrise, there would be nowhere left to run. The first rays of sunrise spilled across the mountains as 8 riders surrounded Elias Boone's hunting cabin. Their horses formed a wide circle among the pine trees, leaving no clear path of escape. Inside, silence filled the room. Noah stood beside the window, gripping the edge of the wooden frame so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The wounded surveyor still slept, his breathing stronger than it had been the night before but far from steady. Elias calmly buttoned his coat and picked up the weathered leather pouch. He slipped it inside a canvas satchel before placing the satchel on the kitchen table. Then he reached for his Winchester, not to fire it but to carry it openly. Some men respected an honest warning more than a hidden threat. A heavy voice echoed from outside. Elias Boone. Silas Crow sat proudly atop a black stallion at the center of the clearing. You've got something that belongs to me. Elias stepped onto the porch. The morning air smelled of pine and damp earth. I don't recall seeing your name on it. A faint smile crossed Crow's face. That old surveyor's confused. He stole government property years ago. I'm simply cleaning up unfinished business. Elias rested one hand on the porch railing. Funny. The papers tell a different story. Crow's smile disappeared. For several seconds neither man spoke. The forest itself seemed to wait. Finally Crow sighed. I'll make this easy. Hand over the papers. Walk away. And nobody gets hurt. Elias looked toward the riders surrounding the cabin. Every rifle pointed in roughly the same direction. Every man waited for a single order. I've heard better offers. Crow nodded once. 2 riders dismounted. They began walking toward the porch. Slowly. Confidently. As though victory had already been decided. Behind Elias, Noah whispered, What do we do? The old Marshal never turned around. We wait. The riders reached the bottom step. One placed a boot on the first stair. Then, a distant whistle drifted through the trees. Everyone froze. Another whistle answered from farther down the mountain. Then another. Crow frowned. His men exchanged uneasy glances. Moments later, the sound of galloping horses echoed through the valley. Not one rider. Not 2. An entire group. They emerged between the trees wearing dust-covered coats and silver badges that caught the morning sunlight. Federal deputies. Behind them rode Sheriff Benjamin Hale of Silver Creek. Crow's confident expression cracked for the first time. The sheriff pulled his horse to a stop beside the cabin. "Morning, Elias." Elias nodded politely. "Glad you found the place." Crow slowly turned toward the sheriff. "What exactly is the meaning of this?" Sheriff Hale removed a folded telegram from his saddlebag. "This arrived before dawn. It came from the territorial judge in Helena." He looked directly at Crow. "Seems somebody mailed copies of several interesting documents yesterday afternoon." Crow's eyes snapped toward Elias. "You?" The old marshal shrugged. "I've lived long enough to know one copy is no copy." The truth was simple. The moment Elias had discovered the papers inside the abandoned shack, he had quietly sent duplicate documents with a trusted stagecoach driver heading north. Even if Crow had found him, the evidence would have survived. Crow's jaw tightened. "Those papers are forged." Before anyone could answer, a weak voice drifted from inside the cabin. "No." Everyone turned. Thomas Mercer stood in the doorway. He leaned heavily against Noah's shoulder, pale but standing. The old surveyor looked directly at Crow. "I drew every one of those maps." His breathing remained uneven. "I watched you threaten families, force signatures, burn homes, and claim land that never belonged to you." Silence settled across the clearing. Even Crow's hired men lowered their eyes. Sheriff Hale stepped forward. "Thomas Mercer, are you willing to testify before the territorial court?" The old surveyor nodded. "I've waited 20 years. Crow suddenly laughed. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It was desperate. "You'll believe a dying old man over me?" Before the sheriff could respond, another voice answered from behind the deputies. Mrs. Eleanor Briggs slowly rode into the clearing. Behind her came 3 elderly miners. Then the town's blacksmith. Then the owner of the general store. One after another. People who had remained silent for years. Mrs. Briggs looked directly at the sheriff. "I remember the families who disappeared." The blacksmith spoke next. "I repaired wagons that never came home." One miner removed his hat. "My brother owned one of those claims." Another nodded quietly. "We were all too afraid to speak." Crow looked around in disbelief. Fear had protected him for years. Now, it had finally broken. Sheriff Hale climbed from his horse. "Silas Crow, I am placing you under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and the illegal seizure of territorial property." 2 federal deputies stepped forward. For a brief moment Crow considered reaching for his revolver. His hand twitched, then stopped. He slowly raised both hands instead. The fight had left him. Not because he lacked courage. Because the truth now stood against him from every direction. Weeks later, the territorial court ruled in favor of the surviving families. The stolen land was returned. Crow's ranch was divided according to the original survey maps. Thomas Mercer finally testified without fear. His words closed a chapter the territory had tried to forget. As for Noah, the people of Silver Creek no longer called him a thief. Mrs. Briggs hired him to deliver fresh bread each morning, the very bread he had once been accused of stealing. Sheriff Hale officially cleared his name. And Elias Boone did something no one expected. He filed the papers to become Noah's legal guardian. One cool autumn evening, the two stood outside the old schoolhouse watching children play beneath the golden cottonwood trees. A traveler passing through town stopped beside them. "I've heard stories," the man said. "They say a famous outlaw boy used to hide around here." Elias smiled beneath the brim of his hat. "No." He looked toward Noah, who was laughing with several children in the schoolyard. "This is where an honest young man finally found a home." The evening breeze carried the sound of laughter across Silver Creek. For the first time in many years, the town wasn't haunted by the lies it had believed. It was finally living with the truth it had found.